Welcome to our topic of the Ferrari LaFerrari, a limited production hybrid sports car produced between 2013 to 2015. We will mainly touch upon its dynamic system and how this car has an interesting feedback control to run more efficiently.
So in this video, we are going to be taking a look at the Ferrari LaFerrari ingenious variable intake system. Ferrari released its new Ferrari LaFerrari with what they called a continuously variable intake track system. This system allows the intake tube length to increase or decrease based on the engine's RPM. This means that as the RPMs of the engine increase, the length of the intake tube decreases. This is because at low RPMs, the air and fuel in the intake are not combined very much. So the tube is lengthened, giving it more time for the mixture to become more turbulent. This creates a better mixture, and in turn, the engine runs more efficiently, increasing the horsepower produced.
For our project, we chose to use this as our dynamic system. Let's examine the parts. In order to have a system, you need three basic parts: an input, the system itself, and an output. The input is what the system initially reads from the initial conditions set. The system itself is what changes due to the input given. And the output is a resulting state of the changed system. However, this is not a dynamic system. It is still missing some parts. Without any changes, this would be an open system.
So why is the system not dynamic? Well, the first missing piece is the feedback loop. The feedback loop takes the input and sends that information back to the system again, and it becomes a factor of the new input. This is what makes the system dynamic because it is always changing due to the constant amount of new inputs into the system.
The second part is the controller. This is what takes the input and decides what to do with it. In our case, the controller is the car's computer module. This computer controls the length of the intake based on the inputs it receives.
A third component that affects the system is the driver. As the controller decides what the car does, it only responds to the initial decision of the driver. The driver is also directly responsible for parts of the input that controller receives. The controller always receives at least one input at any time. It first receives the idle RPM from the engine, and it only receives this when the driver has not put any other inputs into the system. Then once the driver accelerates, the controller receives the driver's input and the changed RPM as an output, which is due to the change in length of the intake tube.
The inputs of this system are the RPM of the V12 engine and the driver's response to the road ahead. The system begins with an initial reading of the engine's idling RPM, and that is the first value the system reads. Then, based on the driver's surroundings, the driver will accelerate or decelerate, increasing or decreasing the RPM, which the computer takes in as the new input.
So once the car receives the initial output, the computer module in the car reads the RPM and adjusts the length accordingly. The driver is able to tell the engine to increase its RPM or decrease its RPM by the use of the accelerator, brake, and pedal shifters. This input is taken by the computer module, which then adjusts the length of the intake tube. The output is better efficiency for the engine, which means more horsepower, which increases the RPM. This new value is taken as the new input.
The output of the system is the new changed length of the tube, the changed efficiency of the engine, and the changed RPM due to its better efficiency. To summarize, the dynamic system is the Ferrari LaFerrari. The controller for changing the input is the computer module and driver. The dynamic system is the variable intake track system. The system is continuous. Its inputs are the RPM, driver's response. Outputs are the new RPM, better efficiency, and change in tube length. The RPM is being measured. The feedback is the change in RPM and driver's response. And lastly, the performance metrics are the time, speed, horsepower, and torque. Thank you for watching.